Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaste, hello everyone. Welcome to my NPTEL course on interior design. Today we are at lecture 14 and we will continue our discussion. What we discussed during lecture 13, we are sort of building up on that, and we will talk further on building elements or SME or SMC, which is space making crafts. And while we talk about these, there will be a consistent focus or a common discussion on local resources, craftspersons, community participation, their skill sets, and then how we sort of establish interrelationships amongst them, and then we see, this entire space conceptualized together or enhanced or, created or felt. So these elements and crafts coming together, and through different skill sets and through this participation and through this interrelationship, how do we create such interior architecture experiences? So like I said, SME or the building elements, SMC, building crafts or space making crafts, and how by default whenever we talk about these and we understand the conceptualization of space or interior architecture projects, we do try to understand the role and contribution of all of these, and then trying to also understand the interrelationship amongst all of these put together. So these are the contents. So space making elements, we had already started discussion and we saw this table, but just to summarize again, we do have architectural elements, interior elements or ornamental elements, all these interior and architecture elements put together, and that make a space. They are called SMEs or space making elements, and these are the categories that have been sort of adopted from the prior research, and it's also a part of my PhD research at IIT Roorkee, and there are some more details that are added there if somebody is interested to look at. So since we already discussed a lot about these elements, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the attributes of these and some visuals I'm just going to show. So not sort of technical definitions that we have already seen. So when I talk about floor, it's a very crucial element. And if we talk about its origin, in Sanskrit, it is derived from bhutal, and bhu refers to earth or ground and tal refers to the bottom or base. And it sort of becomes like an anchor point or reference. And we have to really see this as a very important element within the interior architecture projects. And it could be an unmodulated floor surface, like very linear and very consistent and uniform. It could also be something modulated where there is a play of levels. It could be something very psychedelic. It could be something very, very, different from what we experience on a plane surface. It could be natural, it could be man-made, we could have different kinds of articulation, it could have a vegetation cover as part of natural or a natural stone, or we could, design expressions, customize details, do interventions as part of our skill sets to have different kinds of floors. There are different kinds of spatial roles that the floor plays. We have done some kind of a discussion already, and it does strongly define and demarcate different zones. It helps in articulation of spaces and defining the boundaries within a space. And even accessories such as rugs, mats, carpets, etc. They help in delineating that much space for a different function through a change in texture or color, etc. And there are different attributes, these elements could assign to a space or a project. For example, a floor could express a threshold. It signifies a threshold. It offers a transition from ambiguous surroundings to contained volumes. And these are like series of stepping stones. It's a house in Osaka. So here it's an expression again of thresholds. This is an elevated floor, defining threshold. The Friendsworth House in Illinois. This is a Bunga house of Kutch. We are seeing the plan. Here also we have very interesting details in terms of floor. And here there are these stones which are approaching the entrance. They make us approach the entrance. And they define the threshold. This is the house in Kyoto. Over here we see some traditional flooring in the interior house of Kyoto again. So it could express threshold and define volumes. Then there is this one application, Sangat, Ahmedabad, architect B.V. Doshi's office. And here we see how floor is used for different purposes and what interesting role it has. The floor as defining sequence of pause and movement, right? So without directly entering in the office, how one is navigating through that space, and there is this sequence of pause and movement, and then we are taken to the office. That's also a sort of a journey, and floor plays an important role there. Floor again as an element connecting and binding the landscape with the built space. So this is the exterior landscaping which is shown over here through this drawing and pattern, and over here we see how it becomes sort of a binder, and it sort of coheses the landscape with the built space. And then floor as a communicator, the branching out of spaces, the kinds of stories that one understands through these building elements. So all of these actually are very crucial aspects of design, also having some philosophical underpinnings and some kind of symbolism, iconography, except like other than the functional aspects. These are also very, very interesting and important parts for a designer to understand. This is the very famous falling water in Pennsylvania, and here also we see how the floor becomes an important point and sort of binds the entire exterior landscape with the overall built form and helps us navigate from one zone to another, and through these series of pause and movements and understanding a certain sequence within the space. Then column, and the Sanskrit equivalent is thumb, and we already discussed the orders, the 5 kinds of orders. And here again we see these columns in place and the entire detail about the shaft, base, capital and entablature, and how they help conceive a space and what are the functions that they do within a space. And again we see some of the examples over here when we talk about columns. Here there is a repetition and there is a rhythm. Here we see these sort of twin columns defining the grandeur and the main entrance. Of course, landmarking. This is again a sort of a landmark and a very, very historic example. And over here at the center, if I'm not sure if it is too visible, but here we see this interesting placement of a column. Here again some examples. This is from Ahmedabad, and then you see the 1-point perspective over here. Very interesting perception within a space. This is another example over here. Then we see the columns in Taj Mahal, the minarets and columns. And of course, very interesting example like this. We also see contemporary examples like the Mumbai terminal and other columns which are used in contemporary projects. So they do a lot of different functions. Then another SME is wall, and we see examples again. This one is from Gujarat, and again some very historical examples. Then again, what does wall do when it is about the subdivision of a space? So it has this attribute, and then understanding the placement of walls, it does help us demarcate certain spaces, this zone versus this zone. And then here again, right, within a walled city also, this sort of a grid, and then the subdivision. Wall also acts as a communicator and encoder of messages. So here again, it's a very sort of a fluid surface over here we see, and this is the brick wall, which is done in a very interesting louvered pattern. This one over here again, lots of messages, history of the place, important elements of a particular architectural style. Also, if there is any kind of epigraphical detail, something written, something etched on the wall, or some kind of a carving or some kind of a motif which is denoting a certain meaning. So those kinds of details also we see on wall as a building element. One of the applications could be like City Palace Udaipur, and here again we see different kinds of walls on different scales, segregating the space, assigning different functions, and this is like a single line schematic, and we have all these subdivisions within this palace in terms of what is the space, what is its functionality, and then the wall is sort of a set of walls is more like a maze navigating from one space to another. So it's Chandra Mahal, or Pritam Niwas Chowk, Diwane Khas, and all of these areas. And we see interesting details of mirror work and mosaic work or meenakari work within this palace at different eye levels on walls, which sort of again accentuate the space. They create drama, they create aesthetic. Plus, again, it becomes a sort of a communicator and encoder of messages from that particular time period, or where did this glass or mirror work come to India from, or whether we influenced it to be taken outside India, and so on. This is another application, the Vietnam Memorial, and we see how wall becomes a very, very crucial medium to communicate. And it's a very interesting project and has to endorse and encompass humane aspects, and because it's a memorial, it has to be very, very subtle. It has to incorporate aspects of emotional design and so on. This is another example where we see the communication and piece of writings and everything. Door, another element, we have talked a lot about its purpose and why it is an important building element. It originates from Japanese word tori, and it means gateway leading to heaven, and the Sanskrit synonym is dwar. And we see some of the examples over here which sort of do act like gateway to heaven. Door also acts as a guide to movement, and it defines entrance, it defines movement, it helps us navigate. And within a floor plan, wherever we see like door openings, it also gives us a sense of direction. Then it also acts as a modulator of facade. So if we see here, there's a lot of articulation, and there is a lot of modulation on the facade that sometimes could be achieved through door as a building element. And what material is it made out of? What are the details that we do on that building element? So it acts as a modulator of the facade, or acts certain interesting details, also catches the movement of eye, and sort of becomes a very interesting part of the entire facade. One of the applications could be the Buland Darwaza, And here again we see this sort of an entrance gateway, or the typology within the door family, and then again how important it is in terms of the scale and grandeur and the functionality it assigns to the project and the overall form. Window is another, of course, interesting building element. It derives from the Old Norse word vindugya. It means eye for wind. There is also a Sanskrit equivalent of window. It is called Vatayan, where Vat means wind and Ayan means to come. This is like one of the examples. Windows could be understood in terms of anatomy. It could be like a perforated window, or it could be like a casement window, which has a proper structure and system in place, where we have the top rail, bottom rail, and all these details. Or it could be something very, very abstract, intricate, with perforations, with lots of motifs and patterns. So, perforated. Then there are other examples. This is dormer window. Here we see the roof and the window at the angle, and this is like the bay window. So different countries, different climates, according to different needs, there can be different kinds of windows and openings. There are again a lot of attributes and a lot of qualities and characteristics that window could serve the purpose of, and it could be known for. So here this example, this is from Sept, this is the north light, this is the window opening over here. So it could act as an aperture for light, it could have a play of transparency and porosity, it could again create a drama in the space, while simultaneously obviously offering the function. It could also act as a passage for air. So here again, this is the very famous Longchamp project, and here we see it act as the passage for air. Again, as a facade modulator, like we talked about the door, and here if we see the Gaudi's architecture, and here Hawa Mahal, and how these window openings, they become facade modulators, and they modulate the entire facade or the surface on which they are placed. Again, also as an image maker, creating a certain image or a certain pattern or a certain conceptual understanding, some philosophical idea or imagery, even that a window could facilitate. It could be something very intricate and very ornate, or it could be simple and geometric. One of the applications shown here is the Bora house in Sidhpur, and we see a lot of window openings over here. Now let's talk about the stair. So the origin of the term lies in the Old English or Old German word stigan, which means to rise, and there's also a Sanskrit counterpart, which is padasat. So stair has different anatomy, and it has different attributes by virtue of that anatomy. It could be a straight flight, it could be spiral, helical, and so on. These are some of the examples, and it sort of assigns movement within a volume. It could be also seen as a pedestal, giving this kind of a pedestal or plinth to the built form and creating an experience for the user to arrive at a certain point. It could also be used as a sort of a seating. So there are different kinds of attributes for steps and stairs. As a movement guide, how we are navigating within the space over here. So here in this interesting project, how it becomes a part of the spiraling gallery, and something like this, like also in the form of a ramp. Something which becomes like an aesthetic element or part of an industrial design vocabulary, even that is possible. So this is Centre Pompidou. And again, as a space modulator that we have been talking about, or a facade modulator, here also, sort of a spiraling steps or staircase, along this minaret or these sort of towers or turrets. So that gives a very interesting modulation to the entire space and the surface. Sometimes also as a ventilation shaft, like we see the examples over here. One of the applications is the Sun Temple Modhera, the stepped one, and we see such interesting examples throughout history. Then we have roof. Roof is again an important building element, and it has been referred to as a ceiling in Middle English terms such as, ceiling and ceiling, and derives its roots from Latin, and often refers to as heaven. And there is also, an English and Dutch term for this, where they refer to it as cabin. Roof also has different kinds of anatomical forms. It could be a flat roof like a slab, or an inclined roof, curved roof like a parabolic one, or dome or vault. It could be a folded plate roof like, corrugated sheets. It could be like a membrane, a shell or tensile roof structure. Could be a space frame, so hexagonal or square, etc. So actually the roof anatomy is very, very fascinating, and it could create very interesting vocabulary to the entire design of the built form of the project that is being worked upon. It has several attributes, it acts as a shelter sometimes it acts as an overhead plane, and it sort of provides a spatial enclosure. It also acts as a modulator of volume, sometimes as an image maker, encoder of symbols, iconography, communication, storytelling, all of that. And this is one of the very famous Baha'i temples in New Delhi, where we see very interesting roof form. There is one more case study where we have sort of seen these different building elements put together in a very interesting way, very famous Jawahar Kala Kendra, and different kinds of walls, different kinds of openings, then a very interesting, roof form. And when we especially go within the interior space, we see from flat roof to domical to vaulted, all different kinds of examples within this entire project. So skylight, courtyard, like this is from the interiors. So once you are situated inside and, near the entrance, and then you look upward. Very interesting material palette, color palette, different symbolism again, defining the space, defining the entrance, natural stone, color palette, and the natural patina of the stone, how it is used to the advantage of the user experience and enhancing the build form. Now continuing with the space making crafts, since we already had a very elaborate discussion on the classification of these crafts and what do we mean by SMC, these are some of the plates or inventories that I have tried to put together here as some examples. And these were developed by me as part of my PhD that I submitted at IIT Roorkee, defended at IIT Roorkee. So let's say we are talking about a building element window, and this is like one case study from Uttarakhand and a place called Khajanchi Mohalla, Almora. So now if I have to analyze this building element in terms of what typologies or what types of windows I see here, I see casement window, which is with, one panel or two panel or three panels. The craft that I see on the window openings is likhai kam, which is carving, wood carving precisely. What are the build forms associated to these openings? Rectangular, and somewhere there is also a mihrab, and there are symbolism and semantic aspects also, assigned to these openings. So it acts like a visual link with the outside world, sometimes a veil concealing things from the outside world, so on. What are the different functions? So, protection from weather, daylighting and ventilation. What is the construction like, so what are the different parts? What if I have to break this opening into its constituent parts? And then, how does the assembly happen? So when I'm showing these examples, and when I said in the beginning that whenever we are going to talk about SMEs and SMCs, there is of course a profound role of the makers, their skills, their understanding of this material, they know it like the back of their hand. How things are put together, what is the joinery, how does the assembly happen, what are the different attributes of these elements and crafts, and what do they convey, what is the semantic or symbolism behind them, and what is the actual function that they fulfill, what is the form like, whether it's rectangular or any other kind of a form. So this is sort of putting all that analysis together. So what are the embellishments that we see here on these openings? Natural motifs, floral motifs, some geometric motifs, also figurative motifs. And what are the narratives or stories that we, get to know through these window openings in Khajanchi Mohalla Almora? So, narratives of nature, of expression, of culture, mythology, also spatial narratives. We understand the space and this entire residence also through narratives which are carried by these openings. So, here this is like one complete inventory where we see a building element, craft associated with it, and all the details that I just discussed. This is another one where we see the element door, and here we see the element wall. So if I talk about door, we see both likhai kam, which is wood carving, and then apan, which are the ceremonial paintings. We see both these crafts over here. So one is more like a narrative craft and one is more like a building craft. So SMC and SNC, those two we discussed, and we see both the examples here. What are the types of these doors? That also is mentioned again. Symbolism, what are the narratives they communicate or encompass, embellishments, how the construction is done, and what all different functions do these doors that we see in this particular house, which is at least 300 years old, and more similar examples in this entire mohalla. So we see this kind of sort of attributes and interrelationship between all these aspects that I am talking about. Then the wall, which is again an important building element, type, load bearing, non load bearing, interior, exterior, what craft goes on it, what is the build form, semantics behind it, some observations which are put here in the form of images, different functions, embellishments, and again the narratives. This is another sort of an inventory or analysis where again we have tried to highlight for you the space making crafts and the surface narrative crafts. So here we see, this is one example, a residence in Garhwal, and here we see, stone and timber, which is used in alternate bends. And this side of the world, it is famous for its Koti Banal style of architecture. So different building elements like balcony and roof, staircase, walls, and we see different kinds of crafts over there in different intensity. So we see some structure based crafts, core structure, the steps which are handcrafted from a single log of timber, and we see some combination of that. We also see surface narrative crafts like this kind of a carving which is not structural per se, but there is some carving which is integrated on the surface, and there are some kind of objects of use that we also see inside these houses. They are there on the other plate. And there is the surface finish, so there is this local soil which is known as khar soil, and for the finishing of the kitchen it is used for the finish. So that's in the interiors. This is another example over here, and here also we have tried to understand different kinds of building elements, column, arches, and what kind of material palette goes into making them. Also, like there was an in-depth analysis also about the community of makers and how these things are made in how much duration of time. So I cannot discuss everything here, but again, I'm just trying to emphasize on this interrelationship between all these aspects that I began my lecture with. And so here also we see space making crafts, structure based, which is the core structure of the house, and the columns, There is structure integrated wood carving that we see here. There is some kind of combination that we see here. There are also surface narrative crafts that we see. So not the structural part, but some kind of integration. Like here there is a band of carving, which is just a surface integration. In the interiors, we also see the apron, which is like the surface finish. So of course, this analysis, as I have been discussing, there is a reference to the work done at SEPT in the context of Himachal Pradesh, and then the research that I have done in the context of Uttarakhand, and we have just tried to put examples from both. These are again, examples where I'm talking about space making crafts, and I'm talking about structure based crafts, and these are seen in the case of furniture. So furniture carries dead load and live load, and it's quite structural in its design. So we see those examples. We also see structural cladding. So there is a timber detailing over the mud flooring. So those kinds of details we see here. There are also objects of use, utilitarian objects like floor mat. So we see all those kinds of examples. Here there is also again, wood carving on the window, which is the likhai kam. This is another consolidated plate, and here we see structure integrated craft, which is the likhai kam here in the door jamb. We also see surface finish or SNC, the surface narrative craft, which is this apron work at the threshold. Here we see the structural clad flooring, this timber plank over mud floor. We also see structural application in the furniture over here. Here we see the structure based craft in terms of the core structure and the design of the columns. Here we see surface integrated craft, so some carving but surface integrated. Also surface finishes here that we see the apron art. This is surface cladding, so this is done out of ringal, which is a species of bamboo which is found in Uttarakhand. So this is just the cladding part. And again the objects of use. This is also made out of ringal. So this paneling that you see over here and also the basket, it's done out of ringal. And there are also, the woolen blanket which is locally made. So we see objects of use and decor, we see surface narrative crafts, we also see space making crafts. So all the categories more or less are seen here in this inventory. So we could analyze interior architecture projects, in terms of different building elements that go into the making of them, and then what are the different space making or building crafts that we could see over there at different levels and different capacities, like I was explaining. And then how, with the help of profound experience of these makers and their skill sets, the tools and techniques they use to, create these kinds of details, how all of these put together within an ecosystem, connecting all the dots, can help us make and enhance a very interesting interior space or an interior architecture project. This is one more interesting inventory which helps us understand that, how we can understand the composition within a space or within a facade or within a plane by decoding what kind of crafts go into the making of it, what is the interval at which they are placed, what are the different kinds of motifs that are used, at what eye levels are they put, are they recurring, is there a rhythm. So we can understand this entire composition, So this is a sort of a structure that I had given to this inventory. So what is the description of motifs? What is the space making element which is seen here? It's a wall. It's rectangular and cuboid. The motifs are Ganesha, ornamented arch, geometric bend. What craft is seen over here is again the likhai kam, which is the wood carving. The material is tun, which is a local wood that is found over here. Technique is relief carving. So within carving also there are different techniques. The community of shilpkars or divans. So all of those details, what is the logic of it structurally, ornamentally, culturally, what are the dimensions, what is the placement of craft in terms of eye level, So all of that, composition and organizing principles. So there is a recurrence of motifs at certain instances which are marked here at A, and so on. Pattern is organic or inorganic or geometric. And whatever we have been studying about elements and principles of design, balance, rhythm, etc. What style? So 18th century row housing, and what is the value matrix, or how do people see these houses or these spaces or these designs or motives. So this entire analysis is done over here. This is the south facade. So yeah, with the help of SME and SMC, we can establish these kinds of organizing principles. We can understand through makers, working with them, how are things put together in such scientific manner with regard to form, function, placement, organizing principles, all of these. So next I will be summarizing this week's findings and learnings. Some of the references over here. Thank you. I'll see you again.